Art restoration is one of the great skills of our time, a painstaking and fascinating process that can only be achieved by a select talented few who work fastidiously on damaged paintings and other artworks or even household objects to bring them back to their former glory. It's something that intrigues a lot of us, so much so that despite recent scandals, one of the BBC's most popular shows right now is The Repair Shop, where members of the public can take beloved objects that they own to be restored. A cynic might question why, if these objects were so beloved they have been shoved in attics, broken and forgotten until the opportunity for a free repair and a TV appearance arose, but that's by the by. On YouTube, Baumgartner Restoration has almost 2 million subscribers, including us, who enjoy his painstaking work on damaged and neglected paintings. The rare skills and talents of the art restorer have possibly been never as appreciated as they are now. Unless you are in Spain, that is, in which case it's apparently a bit of a free-for-all where any amateur with good intentions but perhaps lacking the skill that would otherwise be considered necessary can still have a go. This is the Overlooked Hotel, and this is the wild world of Spanish art restoration. In Spain, it's perfectly legal for amateurs to repair historical artworks, a legal anomaly that seems a bit lax. Who knows what this has resulted in the past? Perhaps we should be surprised that it took until 2012 for this to become a headline-grabbing thing. But once the floodgates were open, that was it. Spain's devil-may-care attitude to art restoration began with the infamous case of 81-year-old Cecilia Giménez and her enthusiastic but unsuccessful attempt to tidy up a battered fresco, Elias Garcia Martinez's Ecce Homo, in her local church in Borja. The results, as you may recall, were not great. At the time of her unique attempt, funds were being raised to pay for a professional restoration of the somewhat battered and worn down work. Giménez was unaware of this and, tired of seeing the deteriorating fresco, decided to take things into her own hands.
This is how Christ was depicted originally, and this as he looks now after a DIY restoration. The much-loved fresco has been a feature in this church in Borja for more than a century, but the years have taken their toll, as these pictures show. Unhappy at the state of the painting, a local worshipper set to work with a paintbrush, but is denied doing it without permission.
No, of course not. Everybody could see me as I was painting, so I wasn't doing it secretly.
But the family of the original artist say the work is now ruined.
Until now, she was just painting the tunic, but the problem started when she began painting the head too. She's destroyed the painting.
Art experts say the 19th century fresco by Elias Garcia Martinez was popular locally, but not particularly valuable, much less so now.
She would later claim that the local priest had been aware of what she was doing and that the work was incomplete. She'd taken a fortnight's holiday after her initial efforts and was planning to complete the piece on her return. Both these claims are questionable. Either way, the finished result was less messiah and more monkey. Ecce Mono, as the painting has now been dubbed, or Monkey Christ. But the initially horrified and embarrassed reactions quickly gave way to something else. An appreciation of an honest, if conventionally awful, bit of outsider art that perhaps had more sincerity than the original work. We can now look back at her heartfelt efforts and see it less as a botched violation of a classic work of art, and more the beginning of a new art movement based around the reinvention of older, more old-fashioned religious pieces. Destruction and rebirth, perhaps. Art has always been reworked and reinterpreted, and we can arguably afford to sacrifice a few generic and interchangeable images of Christ for more authentically passionate pieces that are arguably no less authentic interpretations than those of the classical works. Why should trained artists be the only ones to define a look for religious devotion? Certainly a cynic might look at what happened to Borja's tourist trade after Giménez's novel restoration and feel inspired, especially if you're in a small town or village wanting some of that tourism cash. over 150,000 people have been to see Ecce Homo, a lot more than came to see it before the restoration, and Giménez is having the last laugh, even though she was apparently mortified by the whole thing at the time. She gets half the proceedings from official merchandising and is a celebrity of sorts. Meanwhile, the art and her work have inspired countless unofficial cash-ins, films, and even an opera. Arguably, Ecce Mono is a more important piece than Ecce Homo ever was. However accidental, her efforts do seem to have started a bit of a trend for less well-known cack-handed violations by enthusiastic Spaniards, often involving a certain minimalisation of the facial features and an extravagant use of colour. Perhaps, as my other half, who is Spanish and so should know, states, everybody in Spain wants to be Picasso and possesses a have-a-go attitude to most things usually left to experts. It's in the blood, it seems. Whatever the reason, ever since Giménez's efforts became a global news story and tourist draw, there have been several other similarly crass amateur restorations in other towns and villages. In 2018, the Church of San Miguel de Estella in Navarra wanted to restore their 16th century statue of St. George and, as you do, passed on hiring an actual professional in favour of the local school teacher, who decided that what this piece really needed was a bit of colour and a face that was bright pink. The results rather look as though the teacher had been on the San Miguel himself, adding a vivid Disney-esque colour scheme to the previously monochrome statue. The restoration leaves much to be desired, said the local mayor in a moment of considerable understatement. This one is not an interesting restoration, just an ugly overpaint. Unlike Ecce Mono, the work was not left in its new form. Over the period of 3 months and at a cost of €36,000, the restoration was reversed. The teacher responsible has not been publicly identified, but presumably the locals all knew exactly who it was, and I imagine that they struggled to convince their pupils that they could teach them anything about art after this debacle. That same year, a 15th century statue of the Virgin Mary in El Renadorero in Asturias was given an even more vivid reinterpretation. This piece had been restored already some 15 years earlier, but once again, what it was clearly missing was colour, and lots of it. In a village of just 28 people, or 16 as some sources say, the chances of having a qualified art restorer living locally were slim, and apparently no one considered bringing in an outsider. Step forward local tobacconist Maria Lucia Menendez and her box of paints. The results, I'm sure you'll agree, are interesting, given a cartoonish vividness that perhaps makes the statue seem less devotional and more like a cheap toy, complete with eyeliner, lipstick and penciled-in eyebrows for all 3 figures, including the baby Jesus, who now looks like a pouty, entitled brat. And this is mild stuff compared to the crucifixion figure next to it, while her work on St. Peter simply makes him look drunk. She claims the locals approved, but Gennaro Alonso, the regional Minister for Culture and Education, was perhaps more on the ball when he described the work as more a vengeance than a restoration. In June of 2020, the Virgin Mary was subjected to even more indignities when a Virgin of Bartolomé Esteban Murillo's The Immaculate Conception of Los Venerables was sent to be cleaned by its understandably anonymous private owner. When you own a valuable and important piece by a 17th century artist, you only want to send it to the very best for restoration, of course, which is no doubt why the owner sent it to a local furniture restorer. Quite what went wrong, beyond the obvious mistake of giving the work to somebody entirely unsuitable for the job, is unclear. Presumably, the restorer simply whipped out the terps and got to work, despite his obvious lack of expertise in art restoration, and the results were, well, you can see for yourself. Given that the job had cost €1,200, the results must have been disappointing to the owner, so the restorer gamefully had a second try. This did not improve matters. You might question why the painting's owner was willing to allow the restorer to go at the work again, indeed why he allowed him to have a go to begin with. But the resulting work bears so little resemblance to the original piece that a cynic might think that it was a completely different painting, knocked out quickly to replace an original that was already beyond salvation. Murillo painted several versions of this image, and this isn't one of the pivotal ones. Indeed, it's unclear if this was even an original Murillo, so perhaps its loss isn't quite the tragedy that it otherwise might have been. But still, you have to wonder what on earth everybody involved was thinking. Why would you ask a furniture restorer to do this? And why would they agree? The mind boggles. 2020 also saw another hilariously botched reconstruction, this time of a less important, indeed pretty much unidentified sculpture in the city of Palencia. Here, some unknown creative has taken a beaten but decent enough wall carving outside a bank and reworked it into what appears to be a surrealist tribute to Donald Trump. The resulting work, now known as the Potato Head of Palencia, looks like something from Eyes Without a Face, a ghoulish mask covering the original face as though, and I hesitate to give away trade secrets here, somebody had just plastered over the original in cement and then drawn a nightmarish cartoon face where they thought it should be. The original work dates back to 1923, so it's a relatively recent one compared to the other pieces discussed here, and just how, why, and by who this restoration took place remains a mystery. And on it goes. In 2024, the Ermita de Nuestra de Señora del Miron church in Soria was given a new paint job. You might expect a 16th century church that supposedly has some sort of protected status, there is conflicting information on this, to have some level of protection. But no. What was a rather impressively Baroque and Rococo interior now has Go Faster stripes on the ceiling, and the previously white cherubs and walls are painted with garish salmon and other embellishments. One cherub looks like he's about to go hiking thanks to the new colour scheme, and all have cartoonish pouting faces. It's quite something. Apparently the local diocese immediately ordered the church closed after seeing the results, and Francisco Manuel Espejo, president of Spain's Professional Association of Restorers and Conservators, and the man who must have been driven to despair by all of this, said, "We're not talking about a failed restoration here, we're talking about an assault on heritage." It's easy to understand the outrage felt at these botched restorations, some of which are now beyond salvation. Art vandalism, no matter what the art and what the motives, is ultimately an act of barbarism, and while these works were all done with the best of intentions, they still have a lasting effect on the original pieces. There's also the suspicion, actually pretty much a certainty, that this might be the tip of the iceberg. As has been commented, it's very likely that there are many more of these amateur restorations across Spain in small villages where they have either gone unnoticed by outsiders or else been quietly hidden away by embarrassed locals. Of course, if the Catholic Church wants to avoid this sort of thing, perhaps it should pay more attention to the state of artworks within its buildings, not to mention the buildings themselves. It's not as though the church is short of money. If there was more effort and focus put into maintaining these works, then this would not be a problem that needed solving. But, perhaps we should embrace this new artwork. Instead of tearing down statues, maybe we should be allowing passing window cleaners or scaffolders the chance to reconstruct them into something new, a statement on the modern world as much as the original was of its time. Art needs democratizing. It's still, by and large, the domain of the privileged. Outsider art is always more intriguing, and this accidental strand, which almost feels like an identifiable style at this point, perhaps should be celebrated as something new and authentic. It is, after all, as honest, sincere and referential as the original work, if not more so. I'm sure that Spain is not the only place where this is happening, But the country should own and celebrate its new status as the centre of devotional outsider art reinvention. An exhibition is long overdue. What do you think of this curious new art movement? And have you seen any other examples of awful restoration? Let us know in the comments. This isn't an art movement entirely based in Spain, and I'll be covering more curious acts of weird enhancement and petty vandalism in a later video, including the infamous Russian gallery improvement to Anna Lepurskaya's Three Figures, so no need to suggest that one. If you enjoy this sort of thing, then why not give us a thumbs up, share the video and subscribe if you have yet to do so. Your support helps us move forward. And if you have any suggestions for things that you think we should be covering, let me know. I'm always up for new ideas. You can support us with Super Thanks, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, or buy our merch as well. Check out the links below. Everything helps keep us going and improving. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.